When I was first starting guitar, I did what everybody did. I played that one pentatonic scale that everybody knows, and then from there I learned C.A.G.E.D. But when the time came to play with other people and try to do cool stuff in different keys, I couldn't do it very easily because I always had to go back to the C.A.G.E.D. thing, map out where I was. And I realized there's a really big difference between knowing about something versus being in the heat of the moment when you're taking a solo and being able to instantly use that stuff that you learned. So today I want to help you bridge that gap. Now, in order to conquer C.A.G.E.D. and utilize all these shortcuts, it will be helpful to understand the general concept of how the C.A.G.E.D. system works. And I taught that in the last lesson. I'm going to put a link to that in the corner. And as usual, all these exercises are tabbed out and available on my Patreon page. There's a link down below for that. Also down below, you'll see a link for my free ebooks. I'll put a link in the corner as well. And if you haven't gotten your copy, these are going to help you with all the fundamentals of guitar, so please check that out. Otherwise, let's get started with the lesson. The first thing I want to show you is how we can boil down the entire C.A.G.E.D. system into two shapes instead of this giant complicated shape. You know, in the same way that we train our fingers to have muscle memory for all our chords and everything, we want to train our thought patterns and how we conceptualize the fretboard in order to be able to quickly activate, and access what we need. So we're going to divide C.A.G.E.D. into C and A. That's the first one. So for instance, I'm going to pick a root. Let's say D. I start by finding the root note D on the A string. So that's the 5th fret of the A string. And on one side of this root, I get C, the C shape. On the other side of this root, I get the A shape. And these two shapes are linked by that single root note. You put your pinky on it, and you can make the C-shaped bar chord. You put your index on that same root, and you make the A-shaped bar chord. So out of our C.A.G.E.D., C-A.G.E.D., that's C-A. Now we have to cover the G-E-D portion of that. And we're going to take the same root note, D, but we're going to find it on the E string instead. So that's D at the 5th fret of the A string. We're going to find the same note, sounds the same, on the thickest string. That's at the 10th fret of the E string. And on one side of it, we can get our G shape. And on the other side of that same root note, we're going to get our E shape. And then we're going to take our root note, we're going to go up the octave. To do that, we go 2 frets higher and then 2 strings higher. And that gives us our octave. So that's also the note D. And from there, we make our D shape. So we have G and E connected at the root, and then the octave shape to get our D shape of C.A.G.E.D. And we're essentially doing the same thing that we did last lesson, but in a quicker way. I'll just review the steps. Step 1, you find your 2 root notes. One of them is on the A string, and the other one is on the E string. So we found our root note there and our root note there. From there, on the A string, you can generate the C and A shape on either side of that root. And on the E string, you can generate the E and G shape on either side of that root. And then optionally, you can pop up to the D shape using the octave shape, and you can make the D shape. Anyways, before we move on, I just want to talk about 2 other connection points that are going to help you put these shapes together. When we broke it down into C-A and then G-E-D, there's a gap between A and G, and then there's a gap between D at the end and the next C. So let's just fill in those gaps. We're going to stay in the same key, in the key of D. So I'm going to find my root, and I'm going to make the A shape. My root's on the A string, so I make an A shape. And these 3 notes right here, where my ring finger is, that's the chord portion of A. It's also the chord portion of G when I make the G shape right here. So those 3 notes are shared by the A shape and the G shape. They're connected at that point. Another connection point, quickly, is between the D chord and the C chord. So I'm just going to play this open D chord right here. We're in the key of D. The open D chord is still part of C.A.G.E.D. And then these 3 notes right here, if I play them like this, that's actually part of my C-shaped bar chord, which is, still a D chord, right? Because my pinky finger is on the note D. Anyways, that's enough about connecting the shapes. Now let's talk about the good stuff. Arpeggios, triads, pentatonics, major and minor scales, and modes, and how that all ties in to the C.A.G.E.D system. And, just saying it that way makes it seem like there's a lot to cover, but they're all part of the same system, and it all builds on top of itself. First, let's discuss our roots. When we're making our shapes, the roots that we're using, the 2 roots that we talked about, plus that one that we get using our octave shape, those are all the major roots making the major chords. And using C.A.G.E.D up to this point, we've just been generating major chords. I generated 5 D major chords. D major, D major, D major, D major, D major. It's important, though, to know how to convert that into minor chords. And all you have to do is take that root note and go down 3 frets. 1, 2, 3. And now my root is on the 2nd fret. And I'm going to keep the same bits up here, keep the same chord. I'm just changing the root. And now I get the relative minor of D, which is B minor. And we don't really need to worry about the chord and the name of it as much as the fact that from our root, we just go down 3 frets and we get the relative minor. And we can do the same thing up here for our root on the 10th fret. We get our G shape making a D chord, or our E shape making a D chord. You go down 1, 2, 3 from that root, and I end up with a B minor chord. When we're playing on, say, a backing track in B minor, we know where that is. We know that, okay, the backing track's in B minor, I found the note B, I go up 3 frets to D, and that's the C.A.G.E.D that I'm going to use. Anyways, for our next thing, I want to discuss the tiniest bit of theory first. A chord contains 3 notes. I know we're playing like a billion notes here with our C.A.G.E.D system, but they're actually the same 3 notes repeating over and over all along the fretboard. And we would number them as chord tones 1, 3, 5. 1 is the root, and then the 3rd and the 5th are the 2 notes that support that root to create the chord. The bar chords, arpeggios, and triads that we're going to be covering are all exclusively made up of 1s, 3s, and 5s. So keep that in mind. We're going to take a look at arpeggios now. And arpeggios are just the same notes from our C.A.G.E.D system, but played one at a time instead of played all together like a chord. Still in the key of D, just to avoid confusion, And we can play it, like a bar chord, or to make an arpeggio, we just play them one at a time. But there's a couple extra notes here that we can't necessarily play when we're playing a chord, but we can do with our arpeggio. So with our C shape, making a D chord using the C shape, we just climb up, and when we get to the very top, we can add this note right here. That's a 5th, and it just so happens to be on the 5th fret. We play it with our pinky. And then we come back down, and then we can add that note just underneath our root. That's another 5th, and then go down to the 3rd here on the 2nd fret. Now, moving on, next we have triads. And triads are very closely related to bar chords and arpeggios in that they also just use the 1, 3, 5. And they're incredibly versatile. And I'm actually going to make a separate lesson. I probably have to make a whole bunch of lessons about them because there's so much. Triads are probably there's the most stuff out of everything on guitar. But basically, you can just take any 3 notes from your arpeggios that are on adjacent strings, and you can play them. So, starting out my arpeggio, the first 3 notes, play them together, that's a triad. Or the next 3 notes, that's another triad. The next 3 notes, another triad. So I'm just going 3 strings at a time, these 3 strings, these 3 strings, and I'm just using the same notes that I discovered with my arpeggio, because the arpeggio added those extra notes, and I can make triads. And on the theory side of things, we're using these, what we're doing right here, we're playing inversions. On piano, it's basic stuff, but the fretboard is a complicated beast and requires a bit of an explanation. Our chord tones, as I mentioned before, are 1, 3, 5. We start with 1, 3, 5, which is our basic triad or our chord, and then we move to the next one. We're starting on 3. We get 3, 5, 1. That's the first inversion. We inverted it once. Then we're going to go to the next one. That's our second inversion, 5, 1, 3. And if this is going too fast for you or confusing you, once again, I got to make an entirely separate lesson about this because there's so many things here. We're like opening up Pandora's box, right? And every little thing needs like another 20-minute explanation. So look below. I'm going to fill them in as fast as I can. And, when they're ready, they'll be ready. Anyways, the next thing I want to talk about is pentatonics. Pentatonic means 5 notes. And as you've discovered at this point, our C.A.G.E.D shapes are making 3 notes, the 1, 3, 5. We just need to add 2 more notes to get those 5 pentatonic tones. One of them is the relative minor that we already learned when we just went down 3 frets from our root. That's also known as the 6. So we have 1, 3, 5, and 6. The other one is the 2, and that's going to be 2 frets below your 3rd. So here with my C-shaped bar chord, 1, 3, there's my 3rd, and I just go 2 frets lower, that's the 2. And you can see above, I've indicated where the 1s, 3s, and 5s are. So we just go to the 3s, we go 2 frets lower, that's our 2. We go to the 1s, we go 3 frets lower, that's our 6. And now we have our pentatonic scale. And something worth noting is the pentatonic scales are always 2 notes per string. And we always want to end on our root. We could also end here on the root, on the relative minor root, using the same notes, and we get B minor instead of D major. That's why we learned that, because we can apply all this stuff. Now, to get the major and minor scales, all you have to do is add 2 more notes to our pentatonic. So with the pentatonic, we have 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. We're missing the 4 and the 7. And those are the notes that are a little bit harder to deal with musically. And that's why with the pentatonic scale, we cut them out. We get the pentatonic scale, we can just shred with it and play anything. And, it's all going to sound great. When you add the 4 and the 7, you have to handle those notes with care. And the reason why I really like the system that I'm teaching you today is because when you learn it in layers like this, you're able to see those things at the same time. You can see the pentatonic scale and the major scale at the same time, and you can kind of see that, oh yeah, those are the notes that are missing from pentatonic. Those are the handle with care notes. And likewise, you can see where the arpeggios are. You're going, taking it even further back, and those are the chord tones. Those are the most stable notes. They're going to sound great all the time pretty much, and you start realizing that the 2 notes that you have to add to make the pentatonic scale, they have a certain color. And that's why you learn it in these layers, because you can kind of expand or compress what you need to do based on how simple or complex the music needs to be. Anyways, we're going to take our pentatonic scale, and we're going to add the 4th and the 7. And you can see that, I just have my chord tones from the pentatonic scale. The 4 is just 1 fret above the 3, and the 7 is just 1 fret below the 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. You don't have to know how to do that, but I'm just counting it out just for, whatever reason. Anyways, for the minor scale, you're using the exact same notes, but you're just starting there. You're not even really starting there. Just whatever notes you play, kind of focus on that note, and they bring the listener's ear to be like, that note must be the root. Finally, we can discuss modes. And modes are, once again, they deserve their own lesson, or several lessons. They're a huge concept, but basically you take that major scale, and depending on which note you focus on or which note everything is leading back to, just like with the relative minor. That's one of the modes. Minor is a mode, major is a mode, and then every other note here can be focused on to create the other modes. So, for instance, we could play lines that focus, they just draw our ear to this note, the second note, right? 1, 2. And that would give us Dorian mode. E Dorian is the same key as D major or D Ionian, which is the modal name. And, at this point, I realize this definitely requires its own lesson. So don't worry if you're not grabbing that, because that's like a whole half-hour talk. But something that's really cool once you explore the other shapes of C.A.G.E.D, once you say get the G shape down, is you can just pop that G shape down into this position. So instead of focusing on the C shape, we can just play the G shape in the exact same place and use all that stuff, and that'll give you D Lydian. It'll give you a brighter major kind of sound. And you may have heard of the concept of pentatonic substitution. Well, when you use the entire C.A.G.E.D system and just substitute an entire block of C.A.G.E.D, an entire shape of it, it includes pentatonic substitution, it includes modes, it includes all this other stuff. So it's a way bigger thing, but it's also easier to understand. So, by thinking about it this way, you have the entire suite of information: pentatonic scale, major scale, arpeggios, bar chords, triads, all that stuff in one spot. And hopefully this gives you some insight into how this all works. I didn't want to make this too crazy and go too far with it, but I did want to be thorough. So please let me know if you have any questions or you want to know anything more about this in the comments down below. I have all the tabs and everything from this lesson in a worksheet on my Patreon page, and I find that once you start working through this yourself, things are going to start to click. You can only watch somebody talk about something for so long before it starts blah, 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 right? You want to experience it yourself and come to your own conclusions. That's how I learned it. That's how everybody I know who understands the fretboard, they did it through self-exploration. They learned about something, then they explored it themselves. In the next lesson, we're going to cover going between the shapes, so you can play all this stuff in different positions on the fretboard. So please like this video and subscribe to my channel, and you'll be notified when that one comes out next week. Otherwise, don't forget to grab your copy of my free ebooks covering rhythm and lead guitar. They're completely free. I'll put a link in the corner for that. Have a fun time practicing, and I'll see you soon.